Well, welcome everybody. My name is Will Marsh. I'm the Director of Education here at Premier Research Labs, and I'm so excited to welcome you all to another episode of our Premier Living podcast. Once again, I'm joined here with our Technical Director, Nathan Dodge. Nathan, it's a pleasure to see you again.
Always good to be here, Will.
And we are actually going to be talking about optimizing your daily rhythms, basically to support optimal and premier outcomes in every single day that you live. And I think it's, something that we take for granted, our sleep and wake cycles. And what I really wanted to maybe frame first for our audience, what are the key processes, right, that help your body wake up to a new day and actually help your body settle down to rest in the evening?
Sure. This is it can be a very complicated discussion. It's multifaceted for sure. But really, I think the whole idea of rhythm is so important here. The idea of having separated stages to your day so that you're clearly delineating that sleep from wakefulness. Because what ends up happening so often in modern life, and let's face it, it's a complex stew of sensory input that just bombards us all day long. I think probably one of those concepts that I very frequently return to is the idea of how much really just the sensorial input for human beings has changed in the last 100 or so years. Mm-hmm. There was a time when darkness at night was truly darkness. If there were any light at all, it came from torches or from candles. It was just a very, very faint form of light, a very natural form of light. And essentially with the advent of electricity, with the adoption of electric lighting, you really kind of eliminated true darkness. It's difficult at this point to find places that are really, really naturally dark anymore. You really almost have to think about it that way, that night should be dark as possible, really, to return to that state that was naturally meant to be what we lived in. And then that way you can separate the dark hours in which sleep would occur from the wakeful hours, which of course then were in the light, in the sun. And so you hear a lot there's a lot of podcasts, obviously, as we know, with people delivering their lectures on these sorts of things and sleep patterns and healthful sleep. And then of course, what you need to do to be awake. And so you can borrow a lot from that. There's certainly things that I would take from that and certainly make, general statements about these topics. But you hear a lot about the idea of that wakefulness. First thing you need to do is to set those patterns such that you have a time in which you sleep that you set for your sleeping, and you need to adhere to that. And then in the same way you're doing that, then you're adhering to your wakefulness schedule. So set aside the time for sleep. We talk about 8 hours of sleep all the time. This is optimal. And again, optimal is relative. Everyone has a specific amount of sleep, but it does seem like somewhere between 6 to 8 or 6 to 9 hours of sleep is generally good for most people. And then if you set that time such that then you have beginning, termination, and then you have the initiation of wakefulness, and you stick to that, they find that definitely keeping those patterns over time is a much more healthful way to live. Of course, when we start talking about that, we think then, well, how often is it that this gets interrupted? And you can't stick to that schedule. The daily grind comes in and interferes with that. You have things to do at night. You can't keep that sleep schedule set. You have to wake up at different times because of different things going on in your life. Stress will make sleep difficult. All of these sorts of things that come into play. And so really just that very fundamental idea of setting those schedules, it really is vital. And as much as you can adhere to that, you really should. There will always be interruptions. I understand that. But as much as you can adhere to that schedule, that's sort of recommendation number one, if you will, in terms of having that healthful sleep and wake cycle.
And is that because, I think you could point to maybe a lot of different reasons why, but one maybe that comes to the top of my mind is more like metabolic entrainment and conditioning factors for how the processes of the body know when to start up, right? What are the benefits of that? Like, why is that beneficial to have like a set pattern and a set, hey, this is when I'm supposed to wake up and this is when I'm supposed to go to sleep? What happens to the body when it's kind of, conditioned in that way?
So, right. So again, keeping those schedules and being in that condition, if you will, or having that conditioning allows the body to go through its proper repair cycle, which is really what sleep is. It's funny how much the misinterpretation of sleep as being it's just this restful period where nothing happens. Quite the contrary, so much happens when you sleep, and so much of it is related to repair and the processes that basically have to go on to fix all of the little things that went on during the daily cycle of wakefulness, the damage that was accumulated essentially. The sleep period is the time for the body to fix itself, to replenish itself, to make those little repairs it needs to. Glycogen restoration is a big part of sleeping. Not to mention the fact that protein synthesis, muscle building occurs during the sleep period very heavily. It's, the most or the most profound, if you will, muscle growth period actually tends to be during the sleep cycle. On top of that, there's also the thing that I like to talk about a lot, which is the glymphatic system and clearance of waste material from the brain. And again, this is such maybe a newer, if you will, understanding that we've really gained over the last 20 years or so is really what the glymphatic system is and what it does, and that its activation is during sleep. And primarily it's during the deepest cycles of sleep, although it can occur during other cycles as well. There's activation in various parts of the brain in terms of moving the quote unquote glymph. But if you don't have proper sleep cycles, if you're not getting full sleep, essentially, so you're hitting all those cycles going from higher activity to lower activity in the brain, you won't get that proper clearance. And there's so many connections now being made in terms of seeing that disorders of the brain. So everything from anxiety disorders to Alzheimer's, or to at least the building up of amyloid plaques and various other things in the brain is in some way at least governed by the glymphatic system and its ability to clear the brain of metabolic waste products. So important to get proper sleep. And that's why the uninterrupted sleep, if you can, is so important, because you have to really allow the brain to get through all of its cycles. Everything, again, from your reducing, as it were, the activity level of the brain, so that the brain waves themselves, it's going from high activity to low activity. And that deepest part of sleep, when you're in the delta wave, that's when so much actually occurs in the body. That's very important. It's glymphatic clearing is occurring in the brain, but also you're getting growth hormone release at that point, too, in the sleep cycle. So it's just, again, it's so vital to optimal health to really have the ability to reach that full set of sleep cycles and be able to rest and repair, so that during wakefulness, you're able to function optimally.
So would you, I think it's interesting because, probably a lot of practitioners listening in, clients, consumers, right? A lot of us typically, when we think about it, we're adhering to a daily schedule of what's going on when the sun's up, right? When I'm eating my first meal, when I'm maybe taking a break, when I have a certain level of activity. Those are all really, really important. But scientifically speaking, would you say that it's most important to have your sleep pattern locked in?
I would definitely say that, because there are, and again, there's all these different things that are tossed around, terminology that you hear. One that I hear frequently is this idea of chronotyping. So when a person is most active, both in terms of their ability to function physically and the ability to function mentally, at what times of the day. And if you really look at that, what it shows is that there's this continuum, if you will. It's a spectrum of where people land on that. And so although you can take any slice of the population in a sample size and you can say, all right, we're going to have this whole group of people test, some sort of physical activity. It could be running, if it, some aerobic exercise, or it could be anaerobic. It could be, weightlifting or something like that. It could be paying attention to a task, all of these things that you can do. And again, you find this spectrum. It's hard to isolate that for all people, this is going to work. So, some people work out in the morning, some people work out at night. Some people find that for whatever reason, their best period of productivity in doing their job is from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. Again, it's this spectrum. So it's really difficult to pigeonhole everybody to one spot. Whereas a sleep schedule, really, again, and sleep schedules that they're finding now that are very time dependent too, in terms of during the period of darkness, being in that sleep state seems to be the most impactful in terms of positive health outcomes. And they've even got studies showing almost down to very specific times in that darkness period, if you will, and finding that health outcomes for people who go to sleep past a certain point in the evening are diminished versus those who go to bed at a certain time, nearer this sort of optimal time, if you will. And definitely passing after the midnight point seems to, and again, not conclusively, but seems to have a deleterious effect on health. So the later past midnight you go, essentially to sleep, the less of this beneficial activity occurs in the brain and the body. So, what they find very frequently is people who are shift workers, people who have who work midnight shift and then, or an overnight shift and then sleep during the day, certainly have far less optimal health. That does seem to be the most common finding in terms of when they start to really drill into these sleep and wakefulness patterns, because you have essentially someone who has a pattern. It's an established pattern for them, and they've in most cases been doing it for, generally speaking, I've seen in a lot of these studies, people have been doing this for years. People who are working through what is normally darkness and the time in which they would be asleep, and instead they're going to sleep at 8 a.m., for example, something like that, which is typically speaking then the time when, if you're following a light and dark cycle, that's when you would be at really that peak wakefulness getting really established in your day. And anyone who works these swing shifts or works a midnight shift or whatever, not having an optimized sleep schedule, it becomes very, very difficult for them to achieve the repair needed to be at optimal health. And it's a really scary thought, because you think about how many people have to work jobs where, again, they're working overnight, or they may be working overnight for a few days and all of a sudden the shift swings and they're working during the day and they can never establish a proper sleep and wakefulness cycle. So again, I mean, it's condition of the modern world perhaps, but certainly something that I think we really need to pay more attention to as we learn more about the beneficial effects of having that distinct sleep wakefulness cycle and trying to adhere to the dark and light cycle as much as possible.
Yeah, it makes me think about, the reality of, can we ever fully escape the influence of the largest, celestial object in our solar system, which is the sun, right? And, I would probably argue, no, we live, I mean, maybe eventually when we live in domes or something like that on a different planet, but the reality of it is we have to be mindful of what is the universal clock of the human paradigm, which is what's shining above us every single day.
Oh, certainly. And really, when you think about that, none of this would be possible without the sun's energy. And look at the simplest forms of life, the earliest forms of life. You had a lot of, don't get me wrong, you had some heterotrophs who were using various forms of materials for their base energy, but the sun provided so much energy that really allowed for the proliferation of life, especially in the carbon-based format, so to speak. But again, I mean, you look at the process of photosynthesis in terms of deriving energy from the sun to create other molecules that allow for growth of the organism. I mean, it's this incredible process, but very much tailored to exactly the type of energy that the sun is providing. And really, it all goes from there, so to speak, that, we require that to more of an extent than I think maybe we realize, in terms of, if not for those, the plants, essentially is what I'm speaking of here, obviously photosynthetic plants, and even some photosynthetic bacteria and whatnot who use the sun for energy. Without those very basic life forms creating, either themselves being a source of food for larger animals, or providing another part of that chain, and then all those plants that provide the compounds that we need, I mean, those wouldn't be produced without them being able to derive energy from the sun. So we're reliant on the sun for all of our food too. I mean, the sun provides the energy to run this planet. And unless there were some evolutionary stepping point where we move beyond that need, then yes, everything is dependent on the sun.
Well, it kind of, we're believers here at Premier that we are light eaters in essence, right? Because everything is coming from the sun, but there's this field effect that so kind of happens because of the environment of the sun and different elements in the environment, how that then can kind of entrain the body and activate certain parts of the body. And I think science is still starting to really conceptualize the importance of like sun exposure on the skin, and how, going outside and getting that first, morning dawn sunrise in the eyes, it causes this cascade of effects in the body. But that's because you're in this field effect of the light that's emitting from the sun. And so, we're still conceptualizing all those benefits. And, it's interesting because imagine if we existed in a world that was just sunshine. We talked about shift workers that were in the dark, or, trying to avoid the sun, but think of what the world would be if it was just sunshine too. Like, be a very hot place, but metabolically and like how we would have to evolve for that would be completely different as well.
Absolutely. And again, because of the, and I love to use the term diurnal, but because of the diurnal processes, meaning day and night, because there is that period of dark that allows for repair and growth, et cetera, that really has entrained us as human beings to function that way, which is why if you put a person somewhere like in the far north of the Arctic Circle, to be there during the time when the midnight sun occurs, I mean, if you're up there that far, the sun does not set. The sun is up. I mean, there are places that people live where for a period of the year, the sun does not set. You have essentially perpetual sunlight, and it may not be full sunlight, but it's never not there. And that effect is profound and not beneficial. And so it's just as bad as being tossed into darkness for 6 months, essentially. That both of those, there's that imbalance. And that imbalance is so negatively skewed, it's so deleterious to health, that it really just goes to highlight the fact that we do have those cycles. We do have to have that period of light and period of dark, or you're going to start to see some serious problems with your body.
Yeah, I mean, it's poetic in a sense, right? I mean, you could apply that philosophy to every single aspect of life, period. Is, you have to have rhythms of day and night, light and dark. And so in that same vein, we want to talk about optimizing those rhythms. And, since we've focused so much on sleep, let's talk about waking up and actually priming ourselves for our day. And then we'll maybe hop into sleep,
Sure.
because I think that's the keynote that we really want to hit on. But, waking up is not necessarily a passive process, correct?
That is correct. It's really funny to me sometimes, actually, because so much of what I hear in other podcasts, there's been so much recently about this idea of how do you optimize your morning routine? So in other words, really what they're saying is, how do you wake up? How do you start your day for really being in the prime of your health and being able to be the most productive person you can be? And getting morning sunshine as soon as possible is incredibly important. There's definite positive effects that seem to be quite profound from this exposure to sunlight early in the day, and getting that exposure before a certain time in the day too. So really this 9 a.m. cutoff point, you really should be getting natural sunlight on your skin, into your eyes prior to 9 a.m. The effects of this really essentially, to keep it just very, very simple, I mean, it's really waking you up. It's allowing the activation of a number of systems in the body that, for whatever reason, evolutionarily speaking, you want to say, that is how they were developed. They were developed to have that exposure, so that we really weren't meant to sleep in until noon every day. Really. I mean, that's a fact. And so activation of multiple parts of the eye and the way that that actually generates activity in the brain, that is dependent on this, really very heavily dependent on being exposed to natural light. In addition, the metabolism shows this very interesting skewing, if you will, toward a positive trend, a skew toward the positive, when the sleep cycle is complete and then you wake up and are exposed to natural light prior to 9 a.m. And there are more and more studies being published daily, well, at least frequently, but more and more studies being published showing just how beneficial this is, and really how much our health is dependent on that part of the schedule in order, again, to be at optimal health throughout the day.
Talk about caffeine for a little bit. I think there's very distinct sects that believe, for some people believe caffeine's totally fine upon waking. Some people believe that it should be avoided until, later in the morning. Talk to us a little bit about your philosophy, how you approach caffeine, and maybe for our practitioners and our viewers, some strategies to help them maybe understand whether caffeine is something that is optimal for them to take, or maybe something for them to maybe avoid.
Well, I suppose this is going to get controversial probably, so I like this question because, as you know, and as everyone here at PRL knows, I am an inveterate user of caffeine. I love caffeine. I love coffee. I love tea. I drink them daily. Some days I probably have more than I should, and certainly some days I drink them later than I should. And when I say that, those statements themselves beg the question, okay, well, what is too much? What is too late? Where are you going with this?
And just for listeners, I'm more of the avoid caffeine at all costs and maybe use it as a pick-me-up when needed. So we have two personalities that representing themselves here.
Certainly. And again, I think that really it is a very individualized use case. Every person really needs to find what works for them. If they choose to use caffeine, the choice of how to use it is incredibly important, because it is well known that there are two distinct subsets of humans: those who metabolize caffeine much more efficiently and rapidly, called fast metabolizers, very clever, and those who don't metabolize it as efficiently and therefore are very cleverly known as slow metabolizers. This is actually something you can test for genetically if you're very interested in this. And if you are one of those people who has a problem with caffeine, meaning that either low enough doses cause adverse effects or taking it impacts your sleep patterns significantly, then getting tested is actually maybe a good idea, so you can understand at least, am I one of these people? Because it gives you a pretty clear indication then that if you are a slow metabolizer and you're having trouble sleeping because you drank a cup of coffee at 10 a.m. or 9 a.m., maybe you shouldn't really take in as much caffeine then, because you're obviously not metabolizing it enough or quickly enough to get proper sleep. So that's really sort of the first caveat I have, is if you do already have problems and you know that it's affecting you somehow adversely, maybe get that checked out. If you don't feel like getting the genetic testing done and you're having adverse effects, then don't use caffeine. Those are sort of very simple rules of thumb that someone can follow. Now, when you start getting into the more nuanced use of caffeine and asking about optimal time frames and things like that, certainly this is where it becomes even more individualized. And individualized all the way down to the level of what it is you're trying to achieve with the caffeine. So for a person who wants to use caffeine just as a daily use, I wake up in the morning and I need to have some caffeine to function. You hear that frequently. There's a lot of research into this, and obviously you hear this from a lot of the other talking heads out there on these podcasts, that it's better to essentially delay your intake of caffeine post awakening. So from the time you wake up, giving yourself approximately 2 hours before you take your first caffeine, which essentially what this does is it allows for your body to wake, allows your brain really to wake properly and to naturally remove or rather metabolize the adenosine, because adenosine obviously is the compound that caffeine is going to block. But it allows adenosine essentially to be degraded naturally so that your body enters a properly wakened state without the use of caffeine to force that to happen. If you take caffeine prior to this 2-hour window, so upon waking, you just take it basically in the first 20 minutes of being awake, what this does is it seems to reset that sleep clock, again, this established pattern of sleep, such that you're forcing yourself into a state of wakefulness with the caffeine, and you're bypassing your body's normal pathway to wakefulness. So now there's this sort of, I'll call it confusion, if you will, in that the body suddenly says, oh, look, I'm awake. So this, by nature, should be about a 2-hour period where I get into proper wakefulness. But all of a sudden, I'm here. So I must have actually gotten up at this period an hour and a half ago. So then now your entire sleep schedule is probably going to end up being skewed somehow, because your body's now basically thinking it has been awake for a longer period of time. That's, the general gist of this finding. And of course, then that affects your sleep patterns. It starts to be problematic in terms of, again, that repair phase that you need to have, which is sleep. So that is where a lot of the research has kind of landed at this point. And there's a really great body of evidence behind that. So should everybody do that? Well, again, the research is pointing that way. Does it mean that is absolutely the way you must follow the ingestion of caffeine constantly? Well, no. Again, it's another rule of thumb, and it's a good one to follow. But it is possible to take caffeine a little earlier than that. Certainly, if you don't do that frequently, as long as you're not, again, every day waking up and within 15 minutes drinking a giant cup of coffee, then yes, you can probably do that occasionally and not have a problem. I tend to be a delayed caffeine person. And for me, it has had less to do with, listening to anyone tell me this, because I've been doing this for years. I've never just taken caffeine right from the onset of being awake. It came down to the fact that I like to have a more leisurely waking period. I prefer to wake up, get outside for a few minutes, stretch. That's really my morning routine, is to get outside and stretch outside if I can. I know you do morning yoga, which is wonderful to do.
Full morning workout, actually, which we'll talk about here.
Okay.
In a sec.
Okay. So again, getting out, doing my stretching, having plenty of water to rehydrate from the period of sleep, because that is actually a period in which the body will tend to go further toward dehydration. So having some water right away, usually with a little bit of sea salt in it for electrolytes. I really do find that does help, because we're replenishing not just the water, but obviously the electrolytes lost during that period. And then I really like to also then have, after this, I like to have a good healthy breakfast. And I really am not one of those people who likes to take caffeine with a meal. And I've been this way my whole life. So my parents were both coffee drinkers with breakfast. I could never do that. For whatever reason, I could not. I don't know if it was mental or physical, but I couldn't stomach the idea of drinking a cup of coffee while I'm eating my breakfast. And a lot of this probably came down to the fact that my breakfast is generally pretty healthy. I tend to eat things like a low-fat yogurt, some sort of whole grain, oatmeal or a bran, something that I'm getting in. So I'm getting my carbohydrates with a little bit of protein, low fat, definitely some kind of fresh fruit with that. And I really, for the most part, don't like the taste of coffee with any of those items. Really just don't. And tea, same thing, basically. I mean, I know there's a lot of people out there who would probably say, oh, it's fine, I'll drink tea with anything. But since I'm a green tea drinker and I really appreciate the flavor of green tea, a good high quality green tea, especially Japanese green teas, and I'm going to go give my little push there for Japanese green teas, but the flavors are so subtle and in my opinion, just beautiful, that I drink my tea with nothing else, and usually 30 to 40 minutes minimum past eating something, because I don't want to have any residual taste perception from something. I want to taste the tea. And it really goes the same for coffee as well. I want to taste the coffee. And for whatever reason, that's how I developed. And because of that, that means that based on my schedule with all the other things I do in the morning, I was just tending to take in my caffeine already at that 2-hour period post-waking. So it worked. It worked for me. Now, again, is this the right way to go for everybody? I can't say that. Certainly not. You have to find what works for you. But what I will say is there is a limitation to how much caffeine a person should take in. And this is something I adhere to pretty strongly now, having learned my lesson in the past, in my youth. As I said before, for people who experience negative effects from caffeine, you probably should consider how much you're taking in, or if you should take it at all. If you don't necessarily experience those negative effects, that's great. But realize that past a certain point, you probably will experience negative effects if you take caffeine to a certain level. And in many cases, those negative effects won't be felt profoundly for a while. So you can take in these higher doses of caffeine without knowing necessarily that you're really having these negative effects until it catches up with you. And this really happened to me in my life. So as a quick anecdote about this, in college, I used a lot more caffeine than I use now. And you have to think, I was taking caffeine basically throughout the day. So I would have my morning caffeine, usually a big cup of coffee, again, around 8:30, so about 2 hours after I had awakened. And then I'd probably have another cup of coffee again at like 10 o'clock. So I'd have a class, for example, when I was in college, you have a class in the morning, get out of that class, go get myself another big cup of coffee. Then I would go to work in the lab. And while I'm in the lab, I'd take a break and have another big cup of coffee. And then when I was done working in the lab in the early afternoon, if I didn't have a class, it was time to go to the gym. And so before the gym, it's time for pre-workout, which has a pretty massive dose of caffeine there. Get my workout in, get done, do all of those other things to get ready for my evening classes or evening lab work or whatever I had to do. So sometime in the late afternoon, big cup of tea. Had to have my green tea. So drink that. Probably if it was lab work, have another green tea some point in the middle of my lab work, or right after class, have another big cup of green tea or black tea if that's what I was having a taste for at the moment. So I was finding that in the course of a day, I mean, I was consuming very easily 800, 1,000 milligrams of caffeine. I know that. And some days I did actually keep a journal and I realized, wow, there are many days where I'm actually over a gram of caffeine a day. And the reason I started keeping the journal was that I started to feel the effects eventually. I didn't feel them immediately. I was able to continue on doing what I did and feel mostly normal throughout the day. I started having sleep issues about 2 months into this routine where I was really just taking in a massive amount of caffeine. I didn't think much of it. And it really didn't hit me hard until the summer after the semester was over. The spring semester was over and I was on summer break. And I took a job working construction. And I was so dehydrated during the day working outside. And I couldn't figure out why. I said, I have plenty of water. I have electrolyte drink to go with it. Why do I still feel so terribly dehydrated? And I realized I was not sleeping well at all. But for whatever reason, I wasn't even thinking about that until I started paying attention to that. And I realized, wow, I'm not sleeping well. I wonder what's wrong. So I actually went to go see a friend of mine who was a physician. And he said, you really should probably take a look at how much caffeine you're drinking. And I said, what do you mean? And he said, well, you came into my office with a giant mug of coffee and you're asking me about your sleep. And I said, okay. So that's when I started journaling it and I realized just how much caffeine I was taking in. And really that was about it for my large dose caffeine days, because I realized, wow, I mean, even at that point, the recommended caffeine for a day was about 400 milligrams per person max. I mean, that's when I realized, wow, I'm over double this. And some days, I can tell you right now, the worst I ever had that I recorded, I was about 1,600 milligrams of caffeine. And that can be incredibly dangerous for people who are sensitive to caffeine. So yes, I had to take a hard stop on that, change the way I was taking my caffeine in. And I'm proud to say that most days now I stay well below the 400 milligrams per day. I'm generally right now, at least at this point, I'm averaging only around 200 milligrams a day. And I do it typically in two doses, so to speak. So I'll do a morning and an early afternoon dose so that I can still get my sleep at night.
So talk to, thanks for sharing that. So I think it's a great anecdote for those listening, maybe as a guide, how much maybe not to take in regards
Certainly.
or maybe awareness of where maybe you're yourself or maybe consuming too much caffeine, but natural versus synthetic, and we've talked about the caffeine powders before, but, what's the benefit of going for a natural substance that has caffeine, like our wonderful Premier coffee, versus a just pure white powder caffeine?
So I will definitely say this. So first off, almost all the caffeine on the market is really natural. It's just extracted and then purified. And while that's a way that I think marketing angles it to be very clever, to say, oh, well, this is natural caffeine. Well, yes, it's natural in that it came from coffee, probably from green coffee bean, but then it was extracted and purified. So yeah, it was naturally derived, I suppose, but it still has that semi-synthetic quality. And we talk a lot about that and what is natural versus synthetic versus semi-synthetic. And I'm not casting any aspersions here on that part. It's the marketing part of it that kind of gives me a pause to tell someone that this is natural when, yes, it's from a natural source. But it doesn't include all of those other beneficial compounds that you get from the rest of the plant that contains the caffeine. So when we think of coffee, for example, you're not just getting caffeine. I mean, you're getting 1,000 other chemicals in there, and quite a few which are very beneficial to health. I mean, chlorogenic acids, wonderful antioxidant compounds. You're not getting that when you just take a purified caffeine. You're just getting the caffeine. You're not getting any antioxidants. You're just getting caffeine. And tea, even more so, in my opinion, tea has a whole host of wonderful antioxidants with proven benefits to the body, and not just to the body, but to mental health as well. I mean, having L-theanine in tea, which, again, I mean, as its name kind of implies, it's derived from tea, L-theanine, and really in Latin. And that is a wonderful compound. It really does, in many ways, balance that effect of the caffeine. So if you're just taking a caffeine powder, you're not getting any balancing effect. You're just getting the caffeine. And so the pre-workout situation was, for me, actually probably the most difficult thing to really kick in terms of my daily intake of caffeine.
They make it very addictive, actually. And there's a lot of different reasons why.
Oh, certainly.
I mean, there's the psychological aspect of where you feel like you're getting a better pump because
Certainly.
of which there are vasodilators, right? But
yes,
the caffeine hit itself, it could be drug-like. I mean,
and it really is. And the thing about it is, you're really just getting this straight dose of caffeine, and it's usually pretty high. I mean, if you've ever bought a mass-produced pre-workout and it comes with that little tiny scoop, the problem is, and this is that whole philosophical debate about what people do and what they should do versus what they shouldn't. But let's face it, when you feel like you're getting a beneficial effect from something, the tendency is to do more of it. So yes, if you fill that little tiny scoop up with the recommended amount of pre-workout, you're only getting 200, 250 milligrams of caffeine. But typically speaking, I know from my experience, it wasn't a little tiny level scoop.
a little more.
I'd get a big scoop, and I would do a rounded scoop of it. And if you know anything about the way rounding works on these things, when you do a rounded scoop and you get this dome effect essentially of the powder, if it's a good adhering agglomerating powder, you can get almost 50% more in that. So now you're getting basically 150% of that 250 milligrams of caffeine. And if you're a person who says, wow, this is working pretty well for my workout, I need to take a little extra. Well, now you're getting what, 500 milligrams of caffeine in that single thing that you just chugged down right away? Then, of course, there's the problem of when it stops being effective. And of course, the immediate instinct is, I didn't feel the same rush or pump that I felt on that last one. I think today I'm going to double my dose. And you're already doubled the dose. So now you're getting 4x. Okay, now you're pushing into that 1 gram territory like I was talking about. This is where things get really scary, actually. And we look at how these things are being pushed and how really young people who are interested in fitness are essentially being told, oh, you need to take this pre-workout. It's going to get you the best workout of your life. Well, I can tell you right now from experience that maybe once in a while you take that and it really gives you this great experience, this great workout. But I don't use pre-workouts anymore and I still get great workouts. So for me, it doesn't even make any sense why I did that when I was younger, except that I bought into the hype.
Yeah, it's a lot of ways it's a placebo-like effect, right? From the marketing and what's on the packaging, and a lot of people aren't cued enough into their body to really understand what factors relate to a really successful workout and what drives that feeling of like accomplishment. And it's usually not the pre-workout that's it might psych you up, but it's all the other domino effects from the workout that kind of go into play. And I was the same way. I was a natural bodybuilder. In past life, I used to work for a sports nutrition company. I sold many a pre-workout in my day, and I've sampled a lot on the market in that tenure. And the reality was that you would always reach a limit of when it felt effective. You'd always want to take more. Then you would start to, for me, I wasn't even fully aware of like nervous system entrainment and like how that traps your nervous system into a certain conditioning pattern, which, we talked about how that dose of caffeine completely resets your biological clock in a lot of ways. And, I was working out, 10 p.m., 9 p.m., right? And, there's college kids I know that do that, and they take a dose of pre-workout and then they want to go to bed 3 to 4 hours later after that. And I'm like, you're not getting any quality of sleep, right? And, this is where we talk about, how you can structure your day for success. And I think it's really being mindful as we've kind of, through this arc that we've gone through, be mindful of your stimulant intake and like when that's actually there.
Certainly.
And that's going to lead to optimal outcomes in the future.
Absolutely.
Sleep. So,
yeah.
What are ways, I also, something that I also really found beneficial in my journey, and maybe you've experienced this as well, but it's really starting to understand your cortisol curve and really starting to become aware of how stress is impacting your circadian rhythm.
Yes.
One of the big changes I made in the last, I would say, year or so was starting to work out all the time in the morning instead of in the evening. I used to be, after work, it was kind of like my stress reliever was to add more stress physiologically by going into the gym. But, I was finding that, I was just always taxed the next day. I was never feeling fully rested. And it felt like my morning cortisol was way too high. Like I was just drained physiologically. And what was really interesting is I had to get over that hump to even want to go work out in the morning, right? There's a lot of, let's just say there was a lot of momentum built up behind that pattern. But when I started to adopt, a morning workout and like kind of match the cortisol peak that happens when you wake up, because for those that might not be aware, there's a huge cortisol dump right when your body wakes up. And that's kind of it primes all the different processes in your body to like kickstart, because you're going to be moving now.
Yes.
Right. And so the body needs to be aware of that. And so when I adopted, I'm going to be in line with this cortisol curve, I found, inflammation went down, blood markers, vastly improved, blood pressure, all these different markers. And it was literally just from shifting when that additional stress of working out was in my day.
Mhm.
And so talk to maybe audience a little bit about that cortisol curve and, how we can maybe support healthy management of that
Right.
as well.
So when you think about that, and what you point out is really interesting. So yes, upon awakening, there is a massive surge in cortisol. And that's a good thing because, again, you need it to be primed for your day. You need to be awake. You need to have
It's technically the biggest one
the
of
biggest
the day.
one. It should be.
Should be.
It should be. And see, this is where I was going with, is that it should be the biggest one of the day. If you time your, and again, this goes right back to this idea of delaying your caffeine intake too, is that the idea being that, all right, you've reached this wakefulness point, surge of cortisol. It, in theory, should start to come down during the day, so that what happens is you level off, and you should have only the amount of cortisol that's essentially essential for your body to run, more or less, without having massive spikes of cortisol. Now, what happens is we've structured our lives such that we tend to have spikes of cortisol throughout the day. Terrible spikes too, to the point where they end up being higher than the initial drop of cortisol that you get when you awake. And the problem with using stimulants, the problem with having a very stressful life, the problem with timing certain things perhaps incorrectly to meet that cortisol curve, is what you end up with is this. And it's throughout the whole day. And then all of a sudden you try to go to sleep, and it doesn't make any sense. Your body is not in the state where it can actually really achieve that, because your cortisol is still high then at 9, 10, 11 p.m. And it's a really weird sort of situation for us. And you hear this frequently about needing to stay away from blue light, for example, after a certain point. Well, going right back to this idea of the day and night, the diurnal patterns, darkness, light, sleep, wakefulness. We're exposed to blue light constantly from electronics that we use, and we shouldn't be. But blue light exposure actually causes cortisol release. So being exposed to it late at night, and let's face it, so many people, you're using your phone late at night, you're on the computer, whatever, you're just setting yourself up for failure in that next phase, which is sleep. You won't be able to get where you need to get for sleep. And then so you're delaying the ability to get into proper sleep. And then you're going to be waking up, by the time you get into sleep, you're going to be waking up 3 hours, 4 hours later. Well, that's not going to get you the amount of rest you need. And it's a spiral in the end, because then you're tired when you wake up and you say, I need something to keep me awake. I'll take some caffeine. And now look what you just did. You just keep doing it, and it doesn't resolve itself. And this idea of adrenal fatigue or adrenal burnout, really what that's really saying, I think, and to put it in maybe more scientific terms, is it's overstimulation or overactivation of the HPA axis. And if you have high cortisol levels all day long, just look at the damage that high levels of cortisol cause inside the body. And that's a very profound effect. So everything from blood sugar mismanagement, so insulin issues, to hyperinflammatory states. I mean, it's like a wrecking ball for your body. So this just goes back to this idea that, again, mindfulness of what you're doing, mindfulness of your whole day, all your patterns that you follow is just so vital to being able to really, again, you're going to have some disruptions to patterns, but if you can structure the patterns that you can adhere to as much as you can, if you can have the 80-20 rule, 80% of your day you're able to structure in a favorable manner, that accounts for allowing yourself 20% flexibility in that structure, which, let's face it, if you can get to that point, that's wonderful. You'll be able to have proper sleep schedule, proper waking schedule, where you do the things you want to do and the things you need to do without burning yourself out, without having to rely on a stimulant to just keep you going. And so being mindful is really the key to success, because it allows you to set the parameters you need to set to be healthy.
Yeah, I think it's a beautiful nugget that you just really shared was that 80-20 rule. We so often apply it to the diet. We don't think about it, how it can apply to every choice we make, every decision along the decision tree of the day. But if you're consciously framing and intentionally creating space and allowing you to respond appropriately, it opens up, I guess, greater flexibility and less constraint on how the body then has to kind of force itself, right? And so, if we're, I think, applying that 80-20 rule to every aspect, you might have an ideal scenario, but maybe only 80% of the time it's working out. That's okay, because you'll still be on track. I mean, apply that to bedtime.
Mm-hmm.
If you're 80% on time to going to bed on the time window that you want, that's a significant output in regards to health outcomes. So I think that's beautiful. And then nutrient timing along with that.
Well, that's the other thing. So we didn't even really touch on diet. We only touched on one additive compound to the diet and then just general ideas of sleep. The diet is also going to play a major portion of this because you have to be able to fuel yourself properly. And when we think about even just thinking of something simple like your morning workout, right? So you like to do a morning workout after you wake up. Do you do it fasted or do you eat something first? What's your habit? Fasted.
So, I do use our fermented beets. I may take some amino acids, easy to digest, simple, not really requiring a overall enzymatic activity that's really breaking that down into smaller components, but body just can assimilate that, right? Yes. So and then stimulant free though.
Well, again, that's wonderful. And having something, especially again, like the amino acids, because the uptake is so quick. It's a rapid uptake. Utilization is very high on amino acids, typically free amino acids. So that is something you do see quite frequently with people who work out in the morning. They are still in a fasted state. By taking the aminos, they're not really breaking the fasted state. So that's a really great habit to have. And what it does is it's still allowing you to take in something that can partially account for this added stress you're going to have, that you're going to take on immediately upon waking. And that's really that comes down to the idea of diets and supplementation, what's healthy for supporting the things you're going to do when you're awake or when you sleep for that matter, but making sure that those patterns are there as well to support the overall pattern of sleep and wake. So for you, that's a wonderful thing to do. I myself haven't done fasted workout in quite some time, but when I did, I did the same thing. I would take amino acids. That was the extent of what I would take before I would get into fasted, and primarily it was fasted cardio, especially for doing things like mixed martial arts. Fasted cardio is something I did.
And anecdotally, it feels like it primes kind of the body for the rest of the day.
Well, that is definitely the key. So a little bit of physical activity in the morning, it really does reap a lot of benefits. Because if you think about it too, any kind of stretching activity in the morning, getting yourself out of a state where in sleep, the body has a tendency to, although it's relaxed in some ways, I mean, I use quotation marks when I say relaxed there, but it's relaxed, but we end up in positions when we sleep, just physical manipulations of the body, if you will, that aren't necessarily favorable. And for whatever reason, we manage to sleep in these positions that otherwise might seem somewhat uncomfortable. So if you can't have complete control over the way you sleep and be able to be in this perfectly supine position or lying perfectly on your left-hand side with arm cradled, legs posted up over a pillow so that it's keeping the gap in the thigh to prevent, there's all these little things you can do. And if you can't do all of that, if you wake up in the morning, a stretch is so important. You're moving properly in hopefully you're stretching properly and following proper form and guidelines for stretching, but you're giving a little bit of physical activity enough to really get the heart rate moving. You're increasing heart rate, so you're going to get some more blood flow. You're stretching your body in naturally occurring ways, so the proper movement for the body. You're getting synovial fluid is starting to move properly for joints or lubrication. It's really great to have that movement then first thing. and take advantage of the fact that you are now coming out of sleep, you're going to have that cortisol spike. But for most people, gentle exercise, I don't necessarily recommend a very vigorous exercise first thing in the morning, but for some people it works. But for those who can't do something incredibly vigorous, something soft, stretching, tai chi, qigong, something like that is wonderful for just, again, I like to call it catching, if you will. It's catching the cortisol. So you know you're going to have the spike as you wake up and you come out of it. It's a stressful thing, waking up. So being able to catch the cortisol, kind of do this with it. So I'm going to wake up and I'm going to immediately do something that is not stressful, but I find very relaxing. It's still keeping me moving. So my body's not going to just want to go back to sleep, but it's still not so stressful that I'm compounding the cortisol release. And for you as a person who's worked out enough, I think that's maybe part of the reason why you doing a workout, it can be vigorous in the morning, because for you that is relaxing.
It is in a way. Yeah. It's and I think there's this, one of the worst things I probably, I know there's a lot of people that do, and I'm guilty of it too, but it's that that sleep inertia aspect of laying in the bed and then opening up the phone. Right. And I think we all do it. We're all guilty of it at some level, but taking a moment to realize what that is doing. And especially if you're then going on social media and then getting bombarded by stimuli, or, you're immediately, and we all do it sometimes too, checking the work email, right? But you're not even allowing the mind and the body to ground into this new reality, which is a brand new day, right? So taking 5-10 minutes to breathe, to move, to hydrate, to just integrate. One of the, probably my opinion, because I'm not immediately going to the gym, it's an hour after I'm waking up that I'm actually lifting or, doing aerobic exercise, just to be present.
Yes.
Then you can make a decision of what probably is best for you to do.
Yes.
From there, or go into the social media or go do into the work email. But that's going to just stimulate all these unnecessary psychological and physiological, where your body's just like, hey, I'm just trying to figure out where I'm at.
Well, you and I talk about this frequently here at work, the idea that when you wake up, you go outside, you get some natural sunlight, ground yourself, literally. Take off your shoes and socks if you're not barefoot already. I sleep barefoot. Now you know too much about me. And just walk outside and put your feet on the ground. In the grass, if possible. This is Texas. Sometimes it's hard to find any grass. That's what I do. I wake up, I walk outside into my yard, and I just stand. I have a little garden right there next to me. I get to see what's come up over the last few days and see how it's progressing. And I get to stand outside in the sun with my feet in the grass, being part of nature. And I just think that's the most wonderful thing.
Yeah, and then that echoes throughout the day, right? It's kind of one of those aspects or practices of gratitude. Like for me, I always want to just say thank you, that I'm here, that I get to witness this, that I'm seeing the sunrise again. And yes, there's a million things on my plate, to tackle. But in this one moment, the only thing that I need to do is be present. And that energy, then, when I am faced with a tough call, or like, I'm stressed out and I'm just trying not to be reactive, but actually responding. Well, I can go back to that, that morning moment and say, I'm here to be grateful for everything I'm experiencing. So, I think it's part of the daily hygiene rituals that we can all take on.
Be here now. Ram Dass, be here now.
Amen. We have a lot of products, and, we're going to be featuring this month Cognotropic and Tranquinol. They're kind of our flagship products for both, healthy days and restful nights. And they work together synergistically. I always find this beautiful about, and I think they're both here with us, but, one of the beautiful things about Cognotropic that I hear time and time again is how it actually supports a greater quality of night's sleep. Would you like to explain that scientifically, why that's relevant based on the ingredient profile?
Well, so Cognotropic has and again, I'm a sucker for coffee and anything about coffee, so let's just face it. But Cognotropic specifically has the green coffee extract in it. Green coffee extract has a wonderful effect on increasing BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which for a host of reasons, not the least of which, of course, is increased neuronal connection, actually allows, believe it or not, for and I'll say maybe an increased perception of the quality of sleep, in terms of if the activity of the brain is high and you're doing a lot of things that are causing cognition to be taxed essentially during the day, building up better, more efficient connections between the neurons in the brain is so essential for the brain to do what it needs to do. And then on top of that, if you're achieving peak performance of your brain, then when you sleep, you will also typically have a much more efficient sleep cycle, meaning or cycles, if you will, of sleep, because your brain has been able to essentially produce, and I say produce, maybe that's not the best term, but your brain has been able to perform and you do get a product out of it, which is your outcome, whatever it is that you're doing. And in doing so, a healthy brain that is stimulated properly typically will clear properly too. So as long as you have efficient sleep cycles, you get that lymphatic clearance that you need to have. And more research shows that, yes, if your brain is healthy, your daytime functioning brain and your sleeping clearing brain, if you will, when it's on its cleaning cycle, so to speak, it actually is this sort of additive effect, so that it clears properly. So then the next day when your brain is fully functioning and running, because it's been cleaned properly, it's able to function more. And if you're having better connections built by having this more increase in BDNF that you could get from green coffee extract, well, guess what? The next night it clears itself out again very efficiently. And you just continue to do this. The less waste material in the brain, the more efficient the brain becomes. The more efficient the brain becomes, the better is at clearing out the waste material. It's a wonderful cycle that actually is an improvement cycle, continuous improvement cycle, if you will. And then, of course, Numentics. I can't say enough about Numentics. You like Numentics?
I love Numentics. There's so many analogies that you can pair with Numentics, but I would love to hear yours.
Well, so the one thing I really like about Numentics is, and I know our CEO, Nick, always talks about this, that he gets a very solid increase in his perceived brain activity from Numentics without the push that caffeine gives. So taking something like Numentics is going to allow for, again, a very perceptible increase in clear functioning of the brain without necessarily having to have something that stimulates the whole body like something like caffeine does, because caffeine does end up stimulating the whole body. You feel it physically very, very much, and in some cases far more physically maybe than you feel it mentally. Numentics really is I feel at least primarily mentally when I take it. I don't feel the sort of jittery, the pump, if you will, from the caffeine.
Yeah.
I don't feel that.
The experience I've always had with Cognotropic, Numentics, and Neurofactor is it's almost a dilative capacity neuronally. But, that probably in other areas of the body, it's felt as well, probably beneficially, right?
Yes. It's high antioxidant.
It's a very,
yes.
And that's really, it's an antioxidant for the brain, which, when you think about the active process of thinking, which, I always make the analogy of the car, and the engine of the body is the brain in this scenario. People could argue it's maybe the mitochondria or whatever. For this analogy, it's the brain. And the brain is on, constantly moving. The pistons are firing on all cylinders, and there's going to be waste metabolites that build up. There's going to be oxidative, reactive oxidative species that come up. And, that's just slug. It's just, muck that's now in the brain that it has to be cleared, obviously, either during sleep or through some metabolic process. And when you're providing Numentics to the brain, it's literally antioxidants that can help the body manage that stress more effectively.
Yes, absolutely. And again, those two ingredients have such great clinical research behind them. There's a lot of stuff out on the market that, it's being taken on a wing and a prayer. Whereas, something like Numentics, it really, when you think about it, it's one of, really it's been around for a very long time too. I've known Numentics forever.
History to it. I mean, the cultivation of the spearmint and, how they selected the specific species and they grew it over decades and they're harvesting a specific part of it. Right. And it's akin to the tea industry.
Absolutely. and again, also just think about that spearmint has been used for so long in traditional medicine. And, there was always this understood idea that spearmint brought a certain clarity. So really you get that clarity with the Numentics and really with Cognotropic.
It's a beautiful formula. It's one, if you haven't tried it, I really recommend, trying it just to experience that. And I think that's the beauty of neurotropics. Obviously you want to work through a reputable manufacturer like ourselves, but, the opportunity to have a completely different conscious dilation of your day with a neurotropic and help better or enforce healthy patterns that are more sustainable. Even if you're not on Cognotropic for life, right? It could be, a neurotropic formula like Cognotropic could help you learn patterns that are sustainable and proactive in factors of longevity and beyond, right? And so, if you're looking to make that shift, and as a practitioner, maybe making that introduction to a neurotropic formula could really help somebody completely change their life.
And I don't use it every day.
Yeah.
But I use it when I need it. And when I know that I'm feeling as though there is some degree of sluggishness to my brain's processes. And, if you're really in tune with that and you work in a very intellectually demanding job, I think you can feel that. And I think most people probably have felt that at one time or another. A lot of people just call it brain fog.
Or it's the Thursday hump or the Wednesday,
But again, taking Cognotropic has provided that little boost, that little bit of a boost to allow me to regain that, what I feel at least is the proper functioning of my brain.
And then you have I would say the opposite, or the enantiomer, maybe, to go along with maybe a more scientific analogy with Tranquinol, which it's a completely different formula. And it touches on aspects of the parasympathetic nervous system that I think are so chronically undernourished in today's society and needing solution around.
Well, we're very rarely, it seems, are people in that rest and relax phase. They're always in fight or flight. That seems like that's just the way it is. We've conditioned ourselves in modern society to be high blood pressure, high stress, got to be able to turn on a dime and suddenly change course and do something else. I mean, it's hard to relax in the modern world.
It's a shame, because honestly, to understand when you actually want to consciously put forth the most effort and the best effort, right? And then have time to relax. You're going to, the work that you do in that fight scenario, which in modern society might be the email that you have to type out, right? Or the project, or the, video that you need to produce, or the podcast you're on, right? But, if you don't have that time to get to a baseline neutral, which really, I feel like there's different levels of rest. There's like that baseline neutral, and then there's sleep, which sleep's a completely different.
Sure.
And we can't, it's hard to, you can, but it's harder to access that. You have to kind of intentionally train your body to do that, like with yoga nidra and then these other, mindfulness techniques. But just to get to a baseline of I'm just happy existing and I don't have to do anything.
Yes.
And maybe hopefully a lot of us listening and experiencing that. Maybe you're experiencing that right now, but we need that more in society.
Certainly.
Just feel how more productive we would be, more human we would feel.
Yes.
Right.
But if you can't,
right,
without, changing your entire life immediately, there are things like Tranquinol. And all-star ingredient in Tranquinol, Magnolia bark extract, Honocchiol. I mean, it really is one of those rare things that seems to be able to set you up for success in sleep. And don't get me wrong, melatonin is also a great pair with Tranquinol, something to help you really achieve proper sleep. But Tranquinol is a little different.
Yeah.
Because Tranquinol does not put you to sleep.
No.
But by being able to increase the ability to relax, L-theanine, for example, another compound that helps you get to a more relaxed state.
Which is in Tranquinol.
Yes. But doesn't put you to sleep.
Right.
See, that's where the difference with melatonin. And really, again, I love melatonin. I speak at length about melatonin. We should probably do an entire podcast just on melatonin. But melatonin is very specific. It's not a general relaxing compound. That's really not what it does. Whereas Magnolia bark extract, certainly L-theanine, really what they do is they're just subtly altering the patterns of the brain. L-theanine really it encourages the brain into alpha waves, which is nice because you're still awake, but you're much more relaxed.
Well, then, with the formula too, we have a clinically studied saffron extract, the Afron, if I'm not mistaken.
And Afron is a whole other piece I want to talk on separately, but suffice it to say, saffron is one of those really, really amazing, and I'll say saffron's a compound even though it's a plant. Excuse me, but saffron is one of those incredible plants that the number of positive effects that saffron, the actual stigmas saffron can provide through their active compounds, the crocins, the picocrocins. It's almost unbelievable that there's a plant that produces those, and they're so useful, and actually, believe it or not, in a very small quantity. They're active at low doses.
A stigma too.
Yeah.
And keep in mind when you're seasoning with
you
saffron,
use one or two to an entire pot of food.
Correct. And so it's just fascinating that nature created this powerhouse botanical, which it's literally for creating new plant. I mean, it makes sense that it's so powerful, but
they have to be hand pollinated.
Yeah, it's true.
but again, I mean, it's one of those interesting things that Afron, obviously wonderful, wonderful product. Extracts of saffron have such incredibly proven effects that's, I think, probably the real, maybe the kicker of this, if you will, is that all of these ingredients are very well studied. These are things that have reams and reams of research, controlled trials being done. The evidence is pretty darn clear. And the effectiveness of something like Afron, really falls into that when we talk about reuptake inhibitors, and again, we can go to great length about various reuptake inhibitors. But when you talk about something like Afron or even just saffron in general, it really is a triple reuptake inhibitor. So, you're getting the reuptake inhibition is serotonin, dopamine, and norepinephrine. what's really interesting is, and maybe it's that norepinephrine reuptake inhibition that's really doing it, but it's not making you sleepy. But it's still allowing you, if you so choose or so wanted to go to sleep. And again, having the addition of the L-theanine in there, having the addition of the Magnolia extract, it's really just providing what I would consider to be an optimal combination to allow you to relax whenever you need to during the day, but also sort of optimizing the pre-sleep condition, if you will, so that you can take this to get your mind and body ready to then make that next step into sleep, if that's the time of day you choose to take it.
Yeah, it's a beautiful physiological primer to help your body easily slip into sleep if needed, right?
Yes.
And so, like, using Tranquinol 2 to 3 hours before you're going to go to bed to help with your nighttime routine. Great way just to kind of create a pattern and help enforce that, hey, we're going to go to bed. It's time to relax, and, yes, maybe I'll reach for the phone and maybe I'll, reply to some emails, but at least I'm having some nutrients in my system that are kind of enforcing what is that next stage of the day, which is going to bed. Magnesium malate is in the product. We get a lot of confusion. The reason I'm bringing it up is we get a lot of confusion on magnesium malate and why that is in the product, because it's not a magnesium supplement. We're only getting around 50 milligrams of magnesium, if I'm not mistaken, but you're getting a pretty decent dose of malate, malic acid. What are the benefits of that malic acid?
So one of the nice things about malic acid is malic acid also plays a role in the relaxation cycle, which is really great. Malic acid is one of those interesting compounds as well. So what I have found, at least, is that malic acid for me and magnesium malate, I used to take a large dose of magnesium malate when I was younger to assist with sleep. And it really, just because of the way the malate itself functions. I mean, malate is part of the overall citric acid cycle in the body. I mean, it's actually part of a number of different waste and recycling processes in the body. So it's used, it's waste, it gets recycled. It's a ubiquitous molecule, if you will, not maybe as ubiquitous as ubiquinol or ubiquinone, but you could very easily say this is also a ubiquitous compound in the body. But again, it's necessary for a number of functions in the brain as well, but also the rest of the body. I mean, it's vital part of cellular health in general. And I think one of the things we forget, and I mentioned it earlier, just kind of in passing, is sleep is not really the point where you shut down. These processes are still happening. They still need to be fueled. And so having something that supports the citric acid cycle in the cells is incredibly important. And actually, that's one of the major ways that the malate is functioning in the body. So you are really still feeding the body. And Tranquinol is feeding the body through a number of different pathways, because you have a number of compounds in there that act in different ways. But you're getting magnesium malate, so you're not just getting the magnesium, which is, of course, a relaxing molecule, as it's well known for, but it's also such a vital part of so many functions. You're also getting the malate form as well, which is then helping to drive other functions. So when we talk about premier research labs being very focused on this whole nutrition, so trying to be very holistic in terms of providing more than just the single molecule that has an effect. When you take something like Tranquinol, you're really getting a package deal, so to speak. You're getting proven compounds that work in multiple pathways to support healthy relaxation. And you're really also getting things that are absolutely vital nutrients to the body, things that are going to be incorporated into multiple processes through the body. And so that package deal, if you will, is just so much more of an optimal way to get those improvements that you're looking for in whatever it is you're looking for. In this case with Tranquinol, the improvement is to your relaxation, and it's really driving that for you. So when you need to take Tranquinol, take Tranquinol. If you really want to just relax at a certain point in the day, you feel that your cortisol has spiked too high, that's what Tranquinol is there to support. If you feel it's getting to be late in the evening and you're not quite at the state of relaxation you need to be in to get into optimal sleep, take Tranquinol. That's really what it's there for. It is, as I will always be the one who says this, why are the supplements there? They're there to be a supplement to your daily life, to supplement those things that you may not be getting from the diet, but also to act as a supplement to those patterns and those activities that you do in your life to allow you to reach your optimal health.
So true. And, thank you for sharing our premier philosophy just on, why we manufacture the products that we manufacture and how we're doing that. It is to ensure that almost every single layer of the body, for what we're focused on is optimally nourished, right? And providing the best botanicals to do that, right? And I feel like we could go on for hours on this. I think there's aspects where, I would love to dive more into, the process of, priming the day and, supplements that go along with that and different nutrients that really help to coordinate that. And then there's other aspects to sleep. So what I believe we should do is maybe reserve our next conversation to tap into some more of those other areas. But I guess for our audience here, just in terms of healthy patterning for day and nighttime routines, is there anything else that you feel should be shared?
Just the parting shot, right? So I think this all comes back to the idea of mindfulness, being aware of oneself and aware of what one is doing throughout the entire day. And that optimizing your life, optimizing your health starts with just that first step. Make that one step to try to optimize. It can be very simple, but say, hey, you know what? I think I'm going to start trying to make sure that I get to bed every night by 11 p.m. I don't want to go till midnight or 1 o'clock. I'm going to try to go to bed every night at 11 p.m., making that my goal, my first goal that I want to achieve, and start there. Start with that one step. And getting into these patterns, it takes establishing the pattern. So make that one step, take that first step, I should say, and really make the one change that you want to make to start your journey to optimal health.
It's so true. And it could be whether that's going to bed at a specific time. It could be, maybe giving yourself an hour before you have that cup of coffee. If you're drinking it every time right when you wake up, maybe it's getting the morning movement in, seeing how you, but I can guarantee everybody listening, once you make that one step, the next step that you need to do will kind of really uncover itself. It's the process of self-discovery.
Yes.
And if you need guidance, and you're listening in, work with a practitioner, work with one of our premier practitioners in our network, because they understand the nuance and how the body really is, interconnected, and can maybe help uncover that next step a little bit more easier for you. But it is a personal journey, right? So
it is. But again, I think it's a personal journey, but having someone there to help you, and that's where the practitioner is just absolutely indispensable. You have someone there who can help you with that journey and be there with you along that journey. And that is really the key to all of this.
So true. Nathan Dodge, thank you so much for your time and your wisdom and your stewardship of our premier philosophy. And for all those listening in, thank you for your time. Hopefully it was a illuminating journey into the cycles of day and night. And we'll look forward to having you join us next time, hopefully taking a deeper dive into some of these aspects. But until next time, be well.